Does renting a property lead to faster biological ageing? Well, in this week's episode of Investors Corner, we will look at a recently released news article that says that it does. Now, research and studies carried out by the University of Essex looked at the stress levels that a tenant goes through on renting a property and the uncertainty that they have in a rental property and how that affects their health. Now, within this news article, there was no mention there about landlords, so we will have a discussion on the stress that a landlord goes through in renting their property and looking after their investment. We'll also look at the differences between making a rental payment compared to making a mortgage payment, and we're also joined by Ves, who's a mortgage broker, who will give us an update on the current world of mortgages. So make sure you listen into this one and make sure that you subscribe to the Investors Corner.
Gents, welcome back. As everybody knows, we love a bit of clickbait, don't we?
We do.
It's one of our favourite things across the table. We even love a quick clickbait headline ourselves. So Sky News have published an article, I think researched by the University of Essex and Adelaide as well, saying if you rent a property, biologically you will age faster than a heavy smoker.
Than an ex-smoker.
An ex-smoker.
An ex-smoker.
Thanks for that.
Or a
Ves
former smoker.
Ves, our guest, has got the article open to fact check me. As soon as I said clickbait, he started fact checking me.
Thanks for coming on, Ves, and being our
thanks for joining us.
Thanks
our,
for
our
the lovely
quote
intro.
expert.
Yeah.
In terms of obviously the article, it is an interesting one because if you look at the kind of social media entrepreneurial world at the moment, if you're listening to podcasts and looking at these kind of, people in rented Lamborghinis in Dubai with fake tans, they're all saying the way to make money is not to buy a
Don't
property.
own anything.
Yeah.
Ownership is dead.
They normally last about 9 months on social media and then they just disappear. But that's the kind of trend that kids of this generation have to almost look up to, I guess, a little bit. This is an interesting article because it takes a totally different kind of spin on it. And what's interesting about this article is effectively saying if you've been renting your whole life, you will be put under more stress and therefore you biologically will age faster as a tenant in comparison to a homeowner, which kind of makes sense to me, Andy. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's certain elements that can bring stress to renting, i.e., you might be there for a limited period of time. Decisions can be made that could end your tenancy at that place that you've made home for the past couple of years, and you've got to move on to somewhere else. But from my point of view, what the article was saying that the stress can be brought on by rental arrears, having to move to different homes, and various other things as well. But to me, that's just like home ownership, isn't it? You're not going to stay in the same home forever. You're going to move, and with buying a new home brings stress because you're dealing with solicitors and the whole process. Mortgage payments, same sort of thing as rental arrears. You still got to make those payments. So if interest rates increase, which is what we're seeing now, and payments going up, then that's sort of the same element, really. So yeah, although it does bring stress, it's home ownership brings stress as well.
I guess you could say as a tenant, you know where you stand a little bit more on the finances because you've got a fixed term agreement. I know you have as well with a mortgage scenario, but in a mortgage world, if your boiler packs up, if your bath breaks and you've got no hot water or your roof caves in, you are responsible. Whereas if that happens and you're a tenant, obviously most of the responsibility is shifted onto the landlord to fix it. So financially, you're not actually out of pocket.
Yeah, and you're not making that big investment. Buying a property is probably one of the biggest investments that you're going to make in your life, right? Renting, you've got that sort of flexibility there to not have that massive investment.
What do you reckon, Ves?
The general consensus, immediately, is that actually it shouldn't have that much of an impact. But clearly, obviously, the results that have come out have said otherwise. So it would be interesting to try and unpack what is causing that stress. Is it the fact that in a property transaction, it's a very short, stressful period of time, followed by actually the property ownership, which, yes, everything does fall on you, but you know if you've got yourself some savings, you can deal with it straight away, as opposed to when something goes wrong in a rental property, you have to rely on the estate agent or the lettings agent, you have to rely on the landlord, or you have to rely on a housing association, whoever it is. And sometimes that means that it's not fixed, and it goes on for a longer period of time than it would if you're the owner. I just wonder if that's that prolonged period of stress that you wouldn't necessarily see in a purchase.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's two sides of it. There's the irrational side that people show when they move house. I've just moved house. I don't really get stressed. I don't really allow stress to take over me. But my wife, she listens to this and she'll know. She won't kill me for saying it. Absolutely losing it towards the end with the other people, with the solicitors, with the moving process, and the only people that actually sort of looked after her were the movers, who did a great job on the day. But since we moved, everything in the house is packed up. We've had to pay for everything to be replaced. We're still finding problems. The renter side of things, I think it's the lack of control, isn't it? You don't know when something's going to happen. If something breaks in my house, one of the showers is broken, one of the many things that's broken at the moment in my new house. I'm not bothering to fix it, because we'll just replace the bathroom next year. We're lucky enough we got two bathrooms. We'll use the other one until we replace the bathroom. Whereas in a rental, you report it, and then it's kind of, unless someone is doing a really, really good job of setting timescales and expectations, you're then left in a bit of limbo, which I think is what people don't enjoy.
I think it's a worry element for a tenant, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you're worrying about reporting things and that having a negative impact between the relationship between you as a tenant, the agent, or the landlord, if the landlord manages it directly. And the worry element of when something can be done. If something needs to be done in a property, landlord could always turn around and says they're not doing it. And then you're worrying about that it's never going to be sorted, it's never going to be resolved. You're just in limbo, like you said, on getting things done.
Yeah, I've had my period of stress, but I know now I've got no plans to change that for 20 years.
Yeah.
I've moved into the family house now, so unless something externally comes in and knocks it, I'm there. I'm settled until I retire in that house.
I'm a control freak.
Are you?
Yes.
We didn't know.
And as a result, I can relate to this article, because I totally get it. For me, the fear factor and the anxiety that I would have from being a tenant, a lifetime tenant, not necessarily a tenant for a year or 2 years, but being a lifetime tenant, someone that's planning to never buy and just rent throughout their life, that would just leave me with a huge amount of anxiety, knowing they could sell the property, they could serve notice, they could put the rent up, just all of those things. Especially, I think it's different if I was on my own. If I was just
it's totally
bachelor,
different.
living the
totally
dream.
Different.
But with kids and a wife and a family to look after, I would just have constant level of anxiety every time the landlord or the estate agent messaged me, because I don't want to be same as you. I've got the family home. The plan is we don't need to move out of that home unless, lifetime goal ambition on the dream board one comes up. It will be there. And as a result, that means I feel very relaxed, very comfortable, very in control. So I think that maybe is what they're seeing.
Yeah.
I think you moved into your house, I think, when your daughter was what, 4-ish?
3, yeah.
With a view on secondary schools.
Yeah, primary and secondary.
And I've kind of matched that that kind of time scale and even type of property, to be completely honest. You could put them next to each other. Because it just means that I can go, right, okay, well, next 6 years planned out, and then 6 years after that is planned out, and then there's some freedom to where we want to live. But until then, I don't even have to think about that. It's locked away. I'm in control of my destiny, which you're not. If you rent and you're thinking, I want to live here because of this school catchment area, and then your landlord drops a bomb on you,
you just can't plan that far ahead, can you?
I speak to the school mums and dads. That sounds weird. I speak to the school mums and dads, and one of them has recently gone from renting to renting. And it was about 6 months ago, and I was talking to her. She's got 2 young kids. She walks to school, to the school that she's got her kids into. One of them's there, one of them's at nursery. And I think her little one's in year 2. So as a result, they just couldn't, the landlord decided they were going to sell their property. I think they were paying about, I don't know, they were paying about 1,200 quid. Budget was 1,300 quid. They could not find a house for their family of 4 for love nor money in this area, in this small area, nowhere near being walking distance to the school, let alone in the village itself. So as a result, they've gone from a 2-bed house walking distance to the school in a lovely village to the neighbouring town in a 2-bedroom flat with 2 kids. They're paying £250 a month more, and they now have to drive back to the school, and they're it's still in a nice area, but not as nice an area, not as nice as the village is. And for them, watching the stress levels for her and for him, that was like 3 months of torture for them. It was really hard.
I bet it was, yeah.
And it will still be a bit ongoing now.
Well, they don't have a garden for the kids anymore,
Yeah.
so of course they're more stressed. There's more anxiety.
You got to get the
Biologically, they're
Yeah.
aging more as a result. I
Yeah.
would think that is.
Well,
the
yeah.
case.
I mean, I did I didn't do it. I did it a few times, but the thick end of 3 or 4 weeks of driving across before we got a new school place, it wears thin. I'll tell you. Doing half an hour through rush hour and then again at 3 o'clock is dull.
And I think that kind of links to you've got 2 options of, obviously you have to pay your rent and you have to pay your mortgage. But with a mortgage, it's slightly different, isn't it? Because you're not going to ever be forced out of that property unless, of course, you can't keep up the repayments for a particular
Even then, it
period of
takes a
time.
long period, doesn't it? Because
But
no bank wants to become a landlord.
That's the thing, is that from the lender's perspective, as long as you're keeping up with your payments and following their particular policy, they want to keep you there. They want you to pay for it. They want you to get to the end of that contract. And I'm not saying that the landlord wouldn't, but it's very difficult to, if you're renting, you get to the stage where you're going to go and need to find yourself a new property. You're going to go and effectively have to pay more for less. And it could be argued with a mortgage, it's the same thing, but there are levers that you can adjust to try and make that financing fit. And we had a brief conversation on LinkedIn via the comments on this yesterday, and one of the tools that's being used by people at the moment is increasing that term to deal with the temporary increase in rates. So there are some levers available there that perhaps lenders can have a little bit more tolerance than some landlords, but ultimately it does fall down to, you have to keep up with repayments on both. And I think the counter argument to that is, with a mortgage, it's a lot of money and you owe it. Whereas with renting, is you owe 1,300 quid this month and that's it. You won't owe anything again until next month.
I think lenders would work with you more than a landlord, because the landlord's relying on that income to potentially pay their mortgage on the other property that they currently own. So they're going to want action sooner rather than
it's the
later.
First disclaimer from a mortgage perspective. It's the first disclaimer that you'll see is, if you do not keep up with repayments, your home may be repossessed. And that's true, of course. It's just not. It's the last resort. They will help people, and this is why you're hearing all these adverts at the moment that are saying, if you're struggling, or if you think you're going to struggle in the near future, go speak to your lender now and warn them, and they're going to work with you to make sure that you don't get there. Obviously, it's impossible to guarantee. People lose their jobs and so on. But they're
much more likely to put you onto interest only and bring that payment down, and, like you say, pull levers to do it.
It's supposed to be a repossessing or possessing a property is supposed to be the last resort. It's actually quite interesting. I'd like to know, if they run that research for landlords, whether or not it would also increase biological aging, because at the end of the day, at that point, you're responsible for paying the mortgage, but you also have the uncertainty of whether or not the tenant will pay for their rent and obviously bridge that gap. So
I think previously that might have been the case, but I think now it's so bloody easy to find a tenant. Filling your property is not the problem, is it? Finding the right tenant, yes. having it managed correctly, yes, is where the levers come in.
You're going to get the best possible price right now for the property.
And it's
by
not
some.
If it's sat there empty, there's a serious problem somewhere.
But landlords out there, are you prematurely aging? Pop it down in the comments.
I think,
You all
I
look
can
at
see
me.
why.
I mean,
I'd like to know.
Just 'cause
Okay, so we'll use this as an example. I was a homeowner for about 8.5 years, and then I rented the property out for 1 year before I sold it. That 1 year was more stressful than the 8.5 prior to that. So did I age more? Probably not. Was it more stressful? Yes, I would say marginally, but
I think it should be, though, when you make that decision to turn your property from a residential into an investment, or when you buy an investment and you've committed that amount of money, there you're doing it with risk. So the natural thing is there will be stress levels increased, hopefully with a positive reward at the end. If it was non-stressful and just risk-free, then more people would do it, wouldn't there? So I think it is meant to. It's a bit like parting with 30 grand or 20 grand a year into an ISA. It's still, you'd say, okay, well, it's just going straight into an ISA, and the interest is going to be tax-free, and that's my allowance. But it's still transferring 20 grand out of your account. It still feels pretty stressful when you press proceed.
You're still wondering if it's going to make it. And there's any kind of comparison, isn't there? If I had a 1,200 quid Vauxhall Corsa out the front of our office, I wouldn't really care if someone was going to drive into it. But if I park a brand new Ferrari out the front, I'll probably pop it outside every half an hour.
You've had some experience with that as well, haven't you, Mike?
Neither, thankfully. Well, somewhere in the middle.
I feel like you're hiding something.
I've had some experience of being crashed into in the car park out the front, which was that prematurely aged me.
I think ultimately, actually, if you look at it from, we're all property professionals of one type or another. But I think if you're looking at it from the lens of somebody who has not owned or rented a property yet, because you mentioned social media earlier, and people looking up to these influencers that are saying, do this, don't do that, often with no disclaimers or anything to back up.
I really thought you were going to insert an adjective when you just paused before you said influencer.
And I just think like neither of these options sound particularly pleasant to go and do, because we've listed a lot of things that are difficult in terms of renting, and we've listed a lot of things that are difficult and important in terms of owning a property. One, you're borrowing the largest amount of money you're likely to ever borrow in your life, and the other one, you are responsible for keeping a roof over your head, that sometimes that rug could be pulled at very short notice at somebody else's wish. So neither sound particularly exciting, to be honest. To like a young person,
but you have to do one or the other, realistically. And it depends, I guess, how liquid you want your life to be. If you are in a place where the perfect job might come up, but that job might be in Madrid, well, you need to be renting. If you're in a place where you've got 2 kids and you want them to go to a specific school in 4 years' time, well, you need to be owning a property for it to suit your lifestyle.
So I think renting versus buying, should you rent, should you buy? Let's break it down into the generations a little bit, because that's effectively the topic of this. Is the clickbait, as we mentioned at the beginning, is basically saying you will age faster as a tenant than a buyer. But if we think of it, obviously with kids, I look at it back with my kids, and I think in 10, 15 years, in 15 years, my kids are going to be potentially looking at moving out of home. And the question is, for me, as someone that knows more than they know, definitely now, and at that point as well, especially the profession that I've gone through, do I want them to rent? Do I want them to buy? And from a career point of view, I think that has a bit of an impact as well. Because if one of my kids decide they're going to be a surgeon, then they're going to probably spend most of their life employed with a fairly level increasing salary in quite a risk-free scenario. If they're going to be a really good surgeon, that's pretty much the trajectory they're going to be on. If one of them decides they're going to be a graphic designer or a videographer or something that's a bit more freelance, where they're inevitably going to own their own company of some sort, well, then if that was the case, I would be more inclined to say the one that's going down the career route should probably look to get on the ladder quite quickly and, you know, save some money, invest it, get into the property world as a resident, you know, residentially, and be in that kind of journey on that ladder. Whereas if the other one's going to be a bit more entrepreneurial, I can see why I would think, right, you've been freelancing for a period of time, you built up a little stockpile here. Probably the last thing that you want to do right now with your business to elevate it and scale it is to put 50 grand into buying a property, keep that in your company, stay relatively free for the next kind of 2 to 3 years renting or staying at home or whatever it may be, and try and scale that as your asset. So I think that has probably a bit of a spin on this in this modern era that we think about, is when you do see the Dubai TikTokers saying one thing, and then you see the school teacher saying the next thing, or the parent saying the next thing. I think you've also got to have a little bit of an understanding which path someone's going to go on, because when to do things on different sort of life journeys will probably have a bit of an impact as well.
I think the tricky thing with that is you could be in those industries and you could be in that career progression and you think, actually, I'd quite like to own my house as opposed to rent. And I think it comes down to what the individual wants and sees their life as. And, you know, quite thankfully, there are mortgage products designed for those kinds of professions where there is a bit more flexibility and they're actually designed with that in mind.
I think always buy. I think always at some point buy. It's just whether you buy first or whether you wait. But I think always, you know, if you are 40 years old and you're not a homeowner, I think that's wrong. I think you should be at that point in your life where you should be able to buy a property. But I think when you're in your 30s or when you're in your late 20s, depending on what path you're going on, should be a decision to make whether you're a homeowner in your early 30s, late 20s, or whether you're still building your business out to the point where you want to keep your cash reserves free to focus on that rather than putting them all into a That's just the way I see which way round you do it. But by 40, you should be in that position.
Everyone's ultimate goal should be to own their own property at some point, because as you get older, you know, that's sort of your investment to probably leave your kids when you're no longer here. So that should be everyone's goal. Like you said, it just depends on your goal, your journey, where you're at in your current life, and whether it's the right time to do it now, whether you can do it now, because it is costly to buy a property. But yeah, everyone's goal should be to buy. These stories that you hear, never buy, not for me.
Not in the UK.
Not in the UK.
I get it in different countries where it's become something of the norm, but I think in the UK, it's a safe place to go.
Absolutely.
Talking of safe, should we have a quick 90-second wrap up on the mortgage world, as we're sat here with a mortgage advisor? It'd be rude not to ask the question. It's something that people are always interested in.
You're going to say let's end on a high note and mention that the article also says that biological aging is reversible, which is also the annoying
thing. This is true.
On that article,
sleep more, drink water at the end.
It says that it's reversible if changes came into effect for housing, i.e. limiting rent increases.
It does suggest some
trying to make
changes.
that the cause, and
we'll see what happens.
Clicky bait in there.
Shock
I think maybe we can do a 2-part finale. I can give you a brief overview of what's going on in mortgages, and maybe you can share with renters how to make the experience slightly more stress-free.
Well, that would be very good.
You guys, this you're very much your house in terms of.
I think it would be good to do a podcast for tenants that would like to become homeowners, and I think that would be a great episode to get booked in. So coming soon, you heard it here first exclusively. Ves is committed to that, so we will get him in. but how is the mortgage world at the moment? I mean, it's random, I would say, is what I'm seeing out there.
It's difficult to predict, and we're not really in the business of trying to predict too much. We work with what's there in front of us. There has been a bit of stabilization of rates, especially for people with slightly larger deposits. I had a text message from a client of mine yesterday asking what rates have done since we did his mortgage application, and I'll give you a similar answer. There's been some improvements, minor improvements in certain products, but for his specific one, there had been no improvement. So it's not an across the board improvement. It's not an across the board reduction in rates. There are very much some products that are staying where they are, and I think that will probably remain the case for a little while. It's very difficult to predict what Bank of England will do next in terms of the base rate and what's going to happen in terms of inflation. We get some good news saying that food inflation's going down, but then fuel inflation is going up. So it's very difficult.
I noticed that the other day, actually, fuel prices going up. I noticed that for a while.
Yes, it was an unpleasant thing to see at the petrol station, to be honest.
Unless you've got an electric car like Ian and mine.
Smug face
for some. But yeah, so there are some changes, and I think that, and I always mention this, it's just important to seek advice because it's very different. People's situations are very, very different, and they're very unique. And there are some better options for some people than there were 2 months ago, than a month ago. And there are some options that, probably haven't improved and won't improve for a little while. Obviously a big part of that comes with, how much money are you borrowing and how big is your deposit? So it's important to look at the situation from a holistic point of view and understand somebody's full finances. But it's very unpredictable at the moment, as you say.
I think lenders are testing. You probably can't talk rates and things like that, but I can. So the lenders seem to be testing the water with all sorts of different hook rates with high penalty fees, and there's different like clauses for different things. I think from a home buying point of view, as estate agents, we're definitely seeing more than ever approved in principle mortgages being declined at offer. And that wasn't really a thing for the last couple of decades. That very rare would something get approved in principle and then declined somewhere in the middle section of the transaction. Normally after the application's been submitted, you'd like to think that most of those will get to offer point of view unless someone's lied on the application. Whereas at the moment, it does feel like there is more than I've experienced in 20 years of people getting approved in principle, doing their application, and then the underwriting gets a bit more technical than it normally has done, and the offer doesn't get made. And that seems to be where people are saying at the moment it's harder to get a mortgage because of that.
So on that, I think what really comes in from the advisor's perspective is doing the research on the lender's policy, and often that will include picking up the phone and just speaking to them at length about particular cases before submitting the offer. You don't want to be in a situation where you put the application through and it's declined. It's a really unpleasant place to be from a buyer's perspective. So I think, more so than ever, it's so key to just pick up the phone as an advisor and speak to the lender and really just get a good understanding of what's to come, what else they're going to need in terms of supporting documentation and being ready to produce that when they come asking for it. And often they will ask for things that may seem unreasonable to the client that you almost need to prepare the client for. This is going to come. It's going to seem unreasonable that they want to, credit check somebody who's not related to the application, who's not on the application. You just need to see these things in advance and try and minimize the errors that could happen in terms of that application. But it's difficult for sure. And I wouldn't want to be putting in an application myself if I wasn't a mortgage professional, and even then, we're porting my partner's mortgage, and they would very much like a different advisor to do that. They're not happy with me doing it myself. Something about a conflict of interest. So I think it's more important than ever to just seek advice, speak to people that have contact within the lenders that can just pick up the phone without having to be on hold for 20 minutes and just ask some very frank questions about your specific application and what the likelihood of that application is going to be like if we did put it through.
Yeah, good advice. And I look forward to part 2 where we try and help some tenants become homeowners. That sounds exciting. If you've got comments on this or thoughts on it, or you want some advice from a mortgage point of view or from a rental point of view, from an aging point of view,
Ian knows a lot about reversing aging and biometrics and gut health.
If you search back, I don't know, 20 episodes, there's one that I did with Dimitri and we talk a lot about that side of things. So if you do want to go straight from this podcast into another one, go and find that, and that will talk you through about reducing aging, the aging process, and being healthier and fit. And thank you to everyone that's watched, listened. We'll see you next week.
Why have we made the Investors Corner podcast, Ian?
I think online at the moment there is just way too much noise, waffle and nonsense. Everyone's got an agenda. So the goal was to make a podcast for people that want to invest money in property or other areas where there's no waffle, there's no nonsense, there's no agenda. It's opinion led, but it's an honest opinion. And it might not be the right answer, but we're going to share it.
So on the podcast, we're going to supply people with access to mortgage brokers, financial advisors, planning experts, development consultants, everything around the property industry and the wider fields.
Yeah, so if you're looking at investing in the future, you know that just having an income from your employer or from your business is not enough to give you the life that you want down the line. We're going to hopefully give you some of those answers that will give you the solutions you need for the future.
So please hit the subscribe button. The more subscribers we get, better guests that we can get on, and the more people that we can reach. So hit subscribe.